There are 8 modules in this course as follows: Workflow Basics, Default Workflows and Customizing, Configuring Transitions, Advanced Examples, Service Desk Approvals and Automation, Editing and Testing, Common Problems and Troubleshooting, and Best Practices. So let's start with Workflow Basics. Workflow defines the business process for completing different kinds of tasks. It defines the stages that a task goes through from creation to completion. You can define different workflows for different types of tasks. In the example we're about to look at, imagine that you use Jira to track the process of building a house. Here is our example house building workflow. An issue represents a house to be built. Keep in mind that it does not capture all of the complexity of an actual home building project, but it will suffice to help us review the different parts. Let's begin with statuses. Statuses represent where the issue is, or in our case, the house, within the process of being built. In the diagram, statuses are the colored boxes. We began with a new plan. Then the house can be in design phase, in estimation phase, in construction phase, or eventually it will be completed. Along the way, house building may be put on hold. You might also have other statuses, like under inspection, which is not shown here. Note the different colors of each status. Each color represents a status category. To do is blue, in progress is yellow, and done is green. You'll see these colors in all types of workflows. These help you identify where issues are in their life cycle, particularly in places where a large number of issues are rolled up together. Transitions represent how that issue, or home building task, moves from one status to another. You start design, start estimate, start construction, complete construction, or perhaps cancel the project entirely. A transition can have these various parts configured. Conditions can have permission so that only some people are allowed to execute the transition. For example, only architects can start design. Validators can require additional data before continuing. For example, you must enter the reason when putting a house construction project on hold. Post functions do additional processing as they occur. For example, you may create additional tasks when starting an estimate. Triggers can automate transitions when certain events occur in a different system. In this case, when the supplier ships the construction materials, you can automate the process so that the house building task automatically goes from in estimation to in construction. Resolutions explain why an issue transitions from an open or in progress type of status to a done type of status. In this case, the house building task can go to the completed status either because the project was canceled or because the house was actually built. There may be many other resolutions in Jira. For example, fixed or cannot reproduce in software workflows. Resolution should always be set when an issue goes to its final status, and it should be cleared when an issue is reopened again. In this workflow, the house building task will never be reopened. It is crucial to remember that Jira considers an issue to be resolved if its resolution field has a value, regardless of the actual workflow status it is in. And Jira considers an issue to be unresolved if its resolution field is empty. Workflow properties can further customize and enrich your workflow. You can use step properties to restrict certain actions. For example, so that no more editing is allowed once the house building task is completed. You can use transition properties to do things like translate buttons, so foreign companies can estimate a house building project. So let's look again at the various aspects of a transition's behavior, what they do, and when they occur. This is really where the bulk of Jira workflow customization resides. You can configure your workflow transitions with conditions, validators, post functions, and triggers. These usually map to either a convenience, namely, do the boring stuff for me, or a requirement. For example, you can't close that without updating a field. A condition specifies a situation that must exist before something else is permitted. Conditions control if a transition is visible and therefore available to be used. A validator checks that any input made during the transition is valid before the transition is performed. If a validator fails, its post functions are not executed, and the issue does not progress to the destination status of the transition. A post function is an automated action after a transition has been executed. It carries out any additional processing. A trigger transitions a Jira issue when certain events occur in a connected development tool, such as Atlassian's Bitbucket. It automates the transition, ignoring conditions and validators, and just executes the post functions. You can also add a transition screen to gather required data. We'll look at all these elements in much more depth. To use workflow, including moving an issue on a board, the user has to have certain permissions. Browse Projects permission is needed in order to see the project. If they cannot see it, they cannot use its workflow, or create and edit issues for that matter. Transition Issues permission is needed to use workflow at all. If users do not have this permission, they cannot see and use the workflow buttons on any issue, nor move it on an Agile board. Users may need additional permissions, as specified in the transition's conditions. For example, non-simplified workflows require that users have the Resolve Issues or the Close Issues permissions to resolve or close issues. Other conditions may require that the user belongs to a particular group or project role, or that he is the reporter or assignee. If the user does not meet these conditions, he will not see and therefore will not be able to use that particular transition. Additionally, users need Jira Software Application access to transition in boards, namely to see an Agile board and therefore to move issues from column to column. But note that the simplified workflow does not have any conditions, so users can move issues freely between columns. And users need Jira Service Desk application access, namely to be Service Desk agents, in order to transition issues in Service Desk projects. Workflows are not associated directly to projects. Instead, they are mapped to issue types inside of a workflow scheme. And workflow schemes are associated with one or more projects. Here you see the Dev workflow scheme. It's associated with a single project, Space Programs. There are 4 workflows used in this scheme. Bugs use the Bug workflow, Stories use the Story workflow, and both tasks and subtasks use the Task workflow. All other issue types available in this project, if any, are mapped to the Dev workflow. Notice that multiple issue types can be mapped to the same workflow. An extra layer exists in Service Desk projects, where request types are first mapped to issue types. We will explore this later.